lunch is going to go so fast because you all know what you're going to eat already, right? There'll be no dawdling in line. So we're going to give Barry his full time to speak with us this morning. Barry Finkelstein is one of 4 consultants who formed Stewardship For Us, and previously he was a UUA disseminated consultant when Wayne Clark was at the UUA. He has 35 years experience, and he's married to the lovely Roberta Finkelstein, who serves now our congregation in Wilmington, Delaware, where she is an interim minister. And he is an energetic person about money. Barry.
Thank you, Andrea. Can you hear me okay? Is this good? Okay. So first of all, let me say that it really, I say this often, but I'll say it means more to me today. It really is good to be with you all here today. It's good to be among Unitarian Universalists this week. There's no place else that I would rather be. Dan mentioned the elephant in the room, and I'm sure the elephant in the room is much on our minds. And I will talk a little bit about it because I think maybe it's too soon, I hope not, but I think where there are elephants, there's also opportunity, and opportunity for us as Unitarian Universalists, and that's among the things that I hope we'll talk about. Also, in the interest of full disclosure, while I am going to talk a little bit about stewardship during this session, my more important messages, in my view, are not so much about stewardship, but about other things, about growing our faith and growing our movement, and using stewardship and stewardship-like tools to make that happen. If you want to spend more time on stewardship, join me for the full-length workshop that I'll do this afternoon. That'll be pretty much all stewardship. The other thing that I will say, I hope all of you are feeling this, but it is nice that at least we are going to be electing a woman president. So let me see if I can figure out how this works. Okay, this is good. So this is how it works. Okay, so here's what I hope to do in about 25 minutes and then leave you some time for discussion and conversation. And if at any time you can't hear me, wave your arms or let me know. So first I'm going to start out with a challenge for us as Unitarian Universalists. And that's what I meant by the more important part of this, more than stewardship, even though you'll see that I'm a stewardship junkie. I love stewardship. I love wandering around and talking to Unitarian Universalists about money and talking to congregations about money and how to have more of it for our mission. So I will talk about stewardship and Unitarian Universalism. I want to talk a little bit about what I'm calling expanding the circles of engagement and making new circles as well, and then what we might do next. Okay, so here's my challenge to you. We talked a little bit, Dan talked a little bit earlier about what's happening with mainline left-of-center denominations as we are. I too have seen that, and I'm sure you all know this, that membership and money and impact has all been in a pretty big decline for mainline denominations really over the past 40 years. I was at a conference, maybe some of you were there too, where a woman who was the kind of the overall development stewardship director for the United Methodists came and talked to us a little bit about their experience. And she started out by saying, I'll share with you all of my experience, but you should be aware that we have been in steady decline since the mid-1960s. So the good news of that is that we Unitarian Universalists have not experienced that kind of decline. We have really been holding our own. I've been a Unitarian Universalist since about 1980 or 81, and my wife, Roberta Finkelstein, was a born and raised UU. And from the time of merger, we say that we've been about 200,000 people, and we continue to be about 200,000 people. So that, on the one hand, doesn't sound like a huge thing to shout from the rooftops, but on the other, it's much better than being in steady decline for the past 50 years. But my provocative question to you, and you'll see I have some ideas about this, is how can we expand the circle of our 200,000 to the millions? And that's what I really want to spend some time talking about and thinking about, because that's what I've been thinking about over the past couple of years with the changes in people's relationships with their faith communities, and with changes in technology and changes in the way we see institutions and the way we organize ourselves to do things. What might it mean, instead of thinking of ourselves as 200,000 stalwart UU members, being millions of people that we could call on to do the work that so badly needs to be done in our world? Okay, so that's the challenge. So first, let me talk a little bit. You've seen, it seems like everybody shows some similar slides to this. I could have picked one from any of the two videos we just watched, or Dan, you probably had one of these as well. No, you didn't? Okay. So I think that everything we do related to stewardship and related to mission and related to growth has to be brought back always in the forefront is what is special about Unitarian Universalism? What is our place in the world? What is our purpose? What do we do for one another as members? What do we do for future members, which I'm a big believer in too, that the purpose of our church is not to serve those of us who are here today. The purpose of our churches is to serve people we have no idea who they will be and what they will want and what they will need dozens and hundreds of years down the road, just as the people did before us. So keeping in mind what's special about Unitarian Universalism, whenever you're thinking about stewardship, you're thinking about ministry, you're thinking about governance, always keep in mind what's special. I'll tell a little story here. I've been a stewardship junkie since the early 1980s when Roberta and I were members of the Unitarian Church in Arlington, Virginia, which is a big church. And I got started there mostly because I was interested in social justice, and they had a wonderful social justice program. But fairly quickly, and I'm not even sure how this happened, I became transformed into more of a stewardship and money person. The idea being to help find the resources to do the social justice work that's so important to us. And I think back, and the things that drive me, the things that move me to work with Unitarian Universalists are things like our work for marriage equality, our work for immigration rights and immigration reform, our work on prison reform and dealing with the new Jim Crow and mass incarceration. Those are the kinds of things. One of the earliest things Roberta and I worked on with the church in Arlington was we were a sanctuary for Central American refugees back in the 1980s. And these are the things that float through my mind when I work on stewardship. And I urge you to keep all those things in your minds as well. So stewardship, I always like to start with some definitions so that we know what we're talking about. So where did I go for this first definition that's in quotes? I went to the ancient fount of wisdom available to all of you. I went to Wikipedia, and I did some searches on the word stewardship, and the first one that popped up that resonated with me was taking care of something one does not own. And there's a lot of words in that, and to be honest, I can talk about that for about an hour, which I won't do now. But very much as Dan said earlier, I do not believe that we are the owners of our churches. I don't believe that we are the owners of this faith. I believe that we are the stewards of these institutions for the moment, for this point in time and place, and that if we think of ourselves that way, to my mind, it's a much bigger responsibility than just to be an owner. Just to be an owner, I don't know, feels kind of self-centered and narcissistic, and Lord knows we've seen enough of that. But somehow being a steward transcends that, and it transcends that in time and in place. And what we are stewards of is the mission of Unitarian Universalism. And so that's why I love that first one. Also, it's about making sure that we have the resources to do the work that our faith is all about, that brings us here together. And I'm convinced that if we keep in the forefronts of our minds and our conversations with our fellow members what we're all about and what our purpose is and how we change the world and how we change each of us as individuals, the resources will come. And that's how I like to think about it. And then finally, this third point, I think that there's something special about being generous. I think we humans like to be generous. We like to give to things, we like to give to people, we like to give to causes that we believe in. And I think that stewardship in our congregations is a way to tap into that spirit. And I think that's an important element of growing our souls as Unitarian Universalists. And I would like us to see that more prominently. Like I said, I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I'll talk more about this in the afternoon workshop. But I do like to remind everybody about what some of the best practices are in stewardship. And some of them, people always say, well, what's new and different? Old things aren't working so well. What can we do that's different? And there are some things that are new and different. Many of the things that have always worked really continue to work and are the best ways to do things. And I'll talk about a couple of these for maybe a couple of minutes, and then we'll move on to what I really want to talk about. The first one on here is a mission-based, compelling case. You'll see I'll talk about this quite a bit. I think in our modern society, there's a lot of competition for people's attention, for people's money, for people's time. We have to make the case of why Unitarian Universalism is where people should invest a good chunk of their time and their money. And that means having a compelling case and being able to talk with one another. It's a little bit the elevator speech. It's also sharing one's personal stories. I'm a really big fan of storytelling and making everything direct and personal. By the way, I'll say you'll all get a copy of my slides. I see everyone is very busy taking notes, and if you want to take notes, that's fine, but you certainly don't have to copy down anything that's on the slides. The other thing I'll talk about, the direct ask. I'll jump down to the third point on here. There's nothing more effective in persuading people to do anything that you want them to do than to ask them personally to do it, whether that's to do a job, whether that's to join a movement, whether that's to give money. And I fear that in our congregations we're too often reluctant to really ask people in any direct way for almost anything. We tend to ask the same old people the same old things. We tend to be reticent askers, and I think we can learn to be better askers. And the direct ask, one-on-one conversation, that remains to be the very best way to do stewardship. Doesn't mean you have to do one-on-one conversations for all of your drives every single year, but that's going to be the most effective in bringing people in, getting people more engaged in the congregation, and inspiring more money. I want to talk just for a second about different kinds of money, because that might not make any sense to anybody. What I mean by that is that our churches tend to have money that we raise in the annual budget drive every year. They're kind of pledge based, and that tends to be a big chunk of our operating budget. We also have money that we raise through other fundraising activities. We also tend to have, in many of our congregations, probably many of you, we have long-term funds. We have endowment funds, and we have movements or initiatives to try to get people to contribute to those through planned giving and other ways. Also, from time to time, we have capital campaigns where we raise large sums of money to do some big thing, often a building, but not always. And then we have sometimes borrowed money. So there's many different forms of money. And one of the things that I'm a big fan of, that I'll talk some about in some depth actually this afternoon, is doing some long-range strategic financial planning that takes into account all of this different kinds of money and explains to people how we're marshaling all of the resources that you have entrusted to us, you members, to carry out the mission of this congregation. So I think that's really important. And then the last thing I'll say about this slide is leadership. And what I mean by that is a few different things, but the one thing I'll say that is important and that I want to emphasize is that I think I do a lot of work in my consulting world with nonprofits of various kinds, and in almost all nonprofits, except sometimes for our churches, one big role of leadership is fundraising. And being a good fundraiser and a good steward and a proud giver and contributor. And I think that's an important role for leadership in all of our organizations and should be a more prominent and important role in our UU congregations. Now that doesn't mean, I want to clarify, that doesn't mean that only the wealthiest people who can contribute the most money should be on the board or in leadership roles. But it does mean, in my mind, that everybody in a leadership position should be proud of what they're giving to the church. To me, that's the test. If you can say to yourselves and to one another, here's what I'm giving to this campaign, whether it's time or money or anything else, and I'm proud of it, then I think you're doing what I'm asking. Okay. I'm not going to talk too much more about this. As I mentioned earlier, I think sharing stories is really important. If you come to the afternoon workshop, I'm going to invite people to think about some stories of where you as individuals and as our congregations have done wonderful things for the world, things that have moved you, things that have changed people, things that have changed the world for the better. You want to be able to tell those stories. I'm going to skip over this in the interest of time, I think. Well, the one thing I will say, because I've been thinking quite a bit about it this week, is, as I said at the beginning, I think that this time creates a lot of opportunity for us. My wife reminded me of the story of Esther in the Bible, where the quote at the bottom comes from. It's not exactly a quote, it's a paraphrase, but Esther was asked whether she's the one to be ready for a time such as this. And I think we have to ask ourselves that as Unitarian Universalists too. What does it make sense to do right now in the world, and are we ready to do it? Okay, so let me talk. Here's what I want to talk now about, what I really wanted to talk about, which was how we can go from 200,000 to some number of millions. So first, I have a simple-minded model of congregational life. Maybe you've seen this before in some other form, the concentric circles model of congregational life. The inner circle is the inner core leadership people, probably pretty much all of you, the people who are always around, the people who are 100% committed, the people you can count on to do the work of the church. In general, in my experience, this varies a little bit with the size of the congregation, but there are some limits to how big that inner core can be and still have churches work well. I like to think that it's somewhere around no more than 10%, even in a large church, and no more than about 100 people can be in the inner core, no matter how big, and 100 is probably too many. The circle around the inner core is what I think of as our kind of active members. There are people who join committees, maybe they sing in the choir. They come most Sundays, you see them. They'll show up for the potluck, they'll show up for the auction. They're your active members. The bigger circle on the outside is people who are kind of either new to the congregation, they're not fully engaged, you sometimes hear the word consumers. They come and they sit in the back, particularly in big churches. They hide in the back. And you're part of the membership process in most churches is to try to bring those folks in and get them more engaged. That outer circle boundary tends to be fairly porous. People come in and out. So I have a lot of theories about what you can do with this model. I'll say one, but that's not the main subject of my talk. One is that if you want to grow, you have to make lots of room for people to move from one circle to another. That's not always easy to do. The people in the inner circle tend to clog it up sometimes. Does that sound familiar in your congregation? They tend to move from one job to another, staying in the inner circle, and the new people come and they look around and they say, there's really nothing for me to do here that's leadership-wise, and so they stay in the outer circles where they tend to drift away. So if you want new people to be involved, you got to get out of their way. You got to leave spaces, and sometimes that means some things won't get done. But that's not the main thing I want to talk about. The main thing I want to talk about is how can we take those circles and make more circles out of them or make them much bigger? How can we go from within those 3 rings of circles is where our 200,000 people are right now. And what I would like to see, as I said, is us having millions of people that we are engaged with. And so I want to see our circles expand way outside the traditional circles of members and friends and almost friends or almost members. And that's what I'm going to talk about for the next few minutes. So in the nonprofit world, organizations talk about constituents rather than members typically. Some organizations are membership organizations. But who are our constituents? Who are the people that we keep track of and engage with and invite to participate with us, whether it's give money, whether it's write letters, whether it's join us at a march, whether it's come to a meeting, come to a conference, come to a party. So the first three circles are kind of the leaders, members, and friends up there, my bullets. But then what about the others? What about the other people? I know in many of our congregations that I've wandered among, we have people who sing in the choir who are not members or who don't really do anything else with the church. They come and they sing in the choir. Sometimes we have hired people in the choir, right? We have people who bring their children to RE, but they don't really come to the church, or they come only a little bit. We have people who might come to a bridge group or any of these other things that I've listed up there. They might come to your rummage sale. If we were another kind of nonprofit, we would keep track of all these people, and we would have them in our database, and we would invite them to other things, and we would send them stuff, and we would do analysis on this database, and we would figure out what Joe did the last time he was here, and what Mary did when she came, and what money she spent on various things. And we would invite them to come when we have a march with our Black Lives Matter partners, or when we're going to Planned Parenthood. We would find the people who are interested in reproductive rights, and we would invite them to things, whether they are members or friends or in any of those other three circles. So that's what I'm talking about. So I'm going to come back to this for a second. Let's stick with this. So that's, and I have a lot of ideas, and we'll talk a little bit more about how we get there. But I think that with technology and with the generational changes, you've heard a lot about people, younger generations not joining institutions in the traditional ways. I think if we're going to sustain our membership or grow it over time, we're going to think about membership in a different way. We're going to think about constituency in a different way. We're going to think about people affiliating with us in more and different ways than we have done in the past. The other thing that I think about as far as expansion beyond our circles is doing much more work with partners, and at least one or maybe both of the videos talked about that. Interfaith work, working with secular movements like Black Lives Matter, working with partners about climate change. I didn't remember that I had the Planned Parenthood picture in here. I was talking about that. I think there's tremendous potential for us to expand our presence in the world, expand our impact in the world, and expand not just what we do for the world, but what happens to us as individuals. When we work with other organizations, our impact grows, and our impact grows on ourselves as well. I just think there's tremendous potential there. So how do we do it? How do we do this? And in 5 minutes, you're not going to get too much of the picture of what we might do here, but these are some of the ingredients that I think will enable us to go from 200,000 to some number of millions in our collective consciousness of what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist in these modern times. I think information technology and database is a really crucial thing, and I see, I've worked with, somewhere between 40 and 50 UU congregations, and I think it's safe to say, without insulting anybody, that very few of our congregations manage our database very well. We often have multiple databases of different kinds of people and different kinds of dollars, and very little history of what people have done with us. We have no real official records of what people have volunteered for, what skills they have, what their interests are. Every nonprofit that I work with, no matter how small, no matter how, this is not the word I want to use, but I'm going to use it anyway, no matter how competent or skilled or whatever resources they have, every single one has better data than the best of our congregations has. They have donor databases, and they keep track of them. They are their lifeblood, and they recognize that, and we do not. So if we can recognize that we're dealing with people and information about people, and we have a tremendous amount of information that passes through our doors. If you have a speaker series at your congregation, do you keep track of who shows up for that? Does anybody keep track of that? Nobody, right? You? Okay. If you have a speaker series that's open to the public, and people come in and they show up for the speaker series, do you keep track of who they are and what they might be, what topic they came to see? Every nonprofit that does these things would keep track of that. You'd fill out a little form, you'd sign in, and all they would know is that you showed up for this speaker series about climate change, or you were interested in the speaker series about abortion rights, whatever it is. We don't do that. We can do that. We can keep track of people and invite them to things. And we can give people the opportunity to opt out. We're worried very much, I know I can see it in your minds, that we're worried about being too pushy and too proselytizing and this and that. I think we should worry less about that, because nobody else is worrying about it the way we are, right? You're getting emails from lots and lots of organizations, and some of them piss you off, and we might do some of that as well. But I think if you're respectful and it's perfectly reasonable to say, send, just as Dan talked about the church that invited him and his wife to join the Expectant Parents group. Somebody shows up for a book club or a speaker series or a concert. You say, we're glad to see you showed up for our concert. We want you to know we're having 3 more of them. Or we're going to also do this that you might be interested in. Or next week we're gathering at Planned Parenthood. Please join us. We need more people. Planned Parenthood's really in desperate straits right now. We think you might be a good supporter of that. All they can do is say no, but if you don't ask, they definitely won't say yes. So information and database, the technology is there to do all this. Partnering with others and learning a little bit about how they do things. Like I said, I see lots of nonprofits working on this. There's cheap software to do it. You all have software that'll do it. Engaging young people. You know, we talk about what a challenge it is to engage young people, that young people aren't building institutions the way we old fogies used to build institutions and continue to do so. But they'll do other things, and they'll give to causes. They'll text money to you if you ask them to. And again, they won't do anything if you don't. So how do we move this forward? Well, first of all, let me ask, am I crazy? Is this totally pie in the sky? Will this never happen with Unitarian Universalism? Can we go from 200,000 to 2 million people can we do this? I hope so, because don't we have to? I mean, doesn't the world demand that of us? So what can you do back in your congregation? I know I haven't given you hardly any real specifics about tools, other than the fact that they're there, and I think you can all imagine something that can be done. But what I'm hoping is that some of the 80 or so of you who are in this room, I'm not all that good at estimating, but there's some number of you here. If some of you would go back to your congregations and create some kind of pilot project to do some of this, to keep track of people, to get in touch with them, start small. Start with people who come to some rally that you sponsor. And try to keep track of people and grow your database from the 200 or 50 or 500, whatever the number is that you keep track of now, that are based on your member rolls and your pledging data, your donor households, your pledge units, whatever we call them, and expand it to other people that are not in your traditional circles, and see what happens. And let everybody know. Post things on Facebook. Send me emails. You'll have my email when I send you my slides. But I'm really excited to see this happen. I've been talking to UUs around the country about this. I think the future is going to entail looser organizations, kind of hubs of organizations. I think the boundaries between organizations are going to be fuzzier. So our partnership things, we're going to be partnering here on this issue, partnering here on this issue. We don't even have to agree on everything. My wife likes to tell me that we can partner with the Catholics when it comes to peace issues. We don't partner with them so much when we go to Planned Parenthood. And we have to be able to live with that, because otherwise there's not enough people to partner with. So I think we can do that. And then I think the boundaries around our organization are going to be fuzzy as well. I think you hear a lot about the nuns, the people who no longer affiliate. We don't have to, the goal of congregations for too long, I think, has been growing membership in the traditional way. People sign the book. We got more people signing the book. We're doing great. Well, that's fine. I think we still need to do that. It's a both and thing. But we also should be perfectly open to people who will never sign the book, but who will do things with us. Maybe once a year, maybe twice a year. Maybe they'll give us some money once in a while. We have to be open to that. I think we can do that. So, There's really no time left, but but any questions? Yes, Roberta. Oh, yes. Mm. Yeah, and we had two gatherings in Wilmington that Roberta did the day after the election for people to come, and 65 people showed up between the two gatherings, and there were at least a handful of people that had never been there before who showed up just because they needed to be somewhere. And where better to be than with you, with us. Other thoughts, comments, questions? Yeah. Yeah, so here's what I think about that. So let's say we do work with the Black Lives Matter group in our community, and we keep track of them as a group and maybe as individuals when they show up for things that we might host. So we have Black Lives Matter banner up in front of our church on the highway, and we've had lots of vandalism, and so we've had various rituals to reconstitute it, and people come from other organizations. And we partner with them on various things. I would keep track of that, and I think, and encourage and invite those people to do other things with us as well. Maybe we have a concert, we invite the Black Lives Matter folks to come to the concert. It's a little more diffuse, I think it's a little more indirect, but I think that again, in my model of the future of Unitarian Universalism, it's fuzzy on the edges. So, yes? Mm-hmm.
Are also the us. I think the false separation of us and them is really need to be careful. And when you think about Black Lives You, there's a large group of us who are them and them who are us. And to capitalize on the fact that we are each other.
Yeah, I think that's more eloquent than I could. And the same when you go to Planned Parenthood or an environmental organization. Yeah.
I totally agree with you about the database work and how important that is. Do you have a favorite database system?
I don't. It's a good question. We get that question. The question was whether I have a favorite database system to recommend, and I don't. And it's a good question, and we are working on that. For consultants, we have a little task to try to survey congregations and find out what they're using. In fact, in the afternoon, I'm going to talk a little about that, what people are using, because it's not just for database, but it's what are you using for electronic giving? Are you accepting credit? You know, all the technology that helps smooth the way for things. So sorry, but I don't have an answer at the moment. Yes, over here. Yes, I'm glad you all have better answers than I do for that. But I do think, too, that our mission in the world is not to grow congregations, right? Sometimes we think that. We think we're really successful when we increase our membership rolls. Not that that's a bad thing, but that's not our purpose. Yeah.
I remember at UU in Madison, Wisconsin, our minister talking about why we don't have more diversity in our congregation.
Yeah.
our annual rummage sale in December. We should have some kind of action that we can sign up at that thing. Hey, we're going to be marching on next Sunday or next Saturday. Sign up and see if we can capture their emails. It's so simple and really invite people to get them through the door, and then once we do that, then we can do it.
And I think, well, and I think too, you know, we often say to people, I think we want to be careful, and I'm not really a membership expert, but I think a little about this. You know, we say to people, give us your information, fill out the Pew card, and that way we can tell you more about us. Well, that's not the right message, I don't think. You know, that's not, who wants to hear about us? We want to find places where we can help you do something that you want to do. So, you know, if you show up for the rummage sale, you might say, well, you know, we're doing some things with Planned Parenthood, we're doing this, we're doing that. You might be interested in some of these. Give us your information and we'll let you know when things are happening. You know, and if they don't do it, they don't do it. But like you said, if you don't ask, they certainly won't do it. Other? Last one. Oh, here you are.
I just want to go back to our point and Lee's question. In terms of, going with our faith in the world, in the United States, our mission is not just to bring more Unitarians. It is. I mean, I would love to have this congregation have 3,000, 4,000. We have the capacity.
Mhm.
But the other thing is to be more inclusive of other faith, other communities, other people that I've experienced with. You know, we had a garden project with the Jewish synagogue. It was beautiful. It worked very well until today when I see those people and they're saying, oh, your congregation does incredible work and we're so fond of it. And when we have functions here, they come to us. The same with the Muslim, mosque that we had in the relationship in Western. So that is the kind of mission as Unitarian Universalists we also want to push forward and work on that to be inclusive of all faiths, all ethnicity, all races, everybody. We're all in this together to make a world a beautiful, peaceful world in this very difficult time.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for your thoughts, and I hope you will go forth and do some of this. I'm really excited about it. Thank you.